Hello. Today I will be talking about how community narrative shapes perspective on personal storytelling as a collaborative method in a cultural research. Using the Neighborhood Story Project organization at the University of New Orleans to conduct a personal narrative through in-depth interviews with a member within a community, which an individual is involved in. In addition to conducting in-depth interviews, personal background would be provided to create a personal narrative contributing to a self-published book project developed in the university. Participating in the Neighborhood Story Project organization incorporated creative nonfiction and in-depth interviews to create narratives of individuals and locations by interacting with communities where the stories were created. My own personal narrative describes my childhood growing up as an adopted child into a different ethnic household, recounted by my grandmother describing her childhood in New Orleans and raising two Asian grandchildren. Family is not determined by heritage, but by the relationships defined through goodwill as well as hardships of life. My grandmother, Janice Camana, was born in Lakeview at home on Katina Street. Janice lived in New Orleans from 1935 to 1982. Janice grew up on Ursulines Avenue and attended boarding school from 1945 to 1948, and then lived at home until she graduated. Janice's mother had a variety store along with gardens and used to sell snowballs whenever people came into the store. When her sister got married and left, Janice was taking care of her father, and soon she got married in January of 1954. She lived 6 months in the French Quarter while her in-laws and her husband then moved to Culver Street in Lakeview. After getting robbed a couple of times, Janice and her husband had moved to Slidell due to the closeness of New Orleans and different environment. That's when Janice's firstborn daughter, Ellen, was born in December of 1954 through a difficult childbirth. Janice and her husband had two daughters, Ellen and Rita Jo Camano. Janice had met Eddie through a blind date. One of the girls she had gone to school with had encouraged the date. Janice's father was prejudiced and thought that her date was Italian, which she could not go out with. However, when her father met him, she learned that he was Spanish instead. Eddie and Janice were married for 56 years. Unfortunately, Eddie passed away in 2010 due to cancer in Slidell, where Janice still resides today. Eddie had 16 brain surgeries during his lifetime and needed Janice's assistance with everyday life. Janice's first daughter, Ellen, was born 2 months premature, and Janice was not dilating. In addition, Janice was hemorrhaging and needed a cesarean section. Ellen was successfully birthed but needed to stay in an incubator. Rita Jo was born on Harney Street and a couple months old when Janice moved to North Dorjana. Ellen and Rita Jo went to grammar school at St. Rose of Lima, then on Ursuline. They attended Cabrini on Esplanade. Ellen had endometriosis, which prevented childbirth, and Rita Jo had two miscarriages. As a result, Janice has no biological grandchildren. As a result of Ellen's inability to birth children naturally, Ellen and her husband Christopher had decided to adopt children from China. My sister, which was adopted in the northern part of China, and myself, which was adopted in the southeastern part of China, 3 years apart in age. Janice's family had accepted adopted children as a family no different than biological children. However, her only concern was a lack of knowledge about our heritage history. My father was a Chevron engineer, and as a result, my family had to travel often if we moved overseas to Asia when I was still rather young, and I began to feel a rift between my Asian appearance and my white mannerisms. I began to feel that I was not being true to myself, not speaking my native born language or unaware of Asian culture. Even further, I felt out of place when I moved to Thailand. I was enrolled in a British international school, and despite my appearances, all the students knew how to speak Thai aside from myself. I had to learn multiple languages, including British English, 2 levels of Thai, and Mandarin. I personally chose Mandarin to be more in touch with my Asian culture, but surrounded by such diversity, as well as my dependency on my friends to translate Thai often, I felt extremely out of place. Ellen had passed away from heart failure in 2011. It was a shock to everyone in the family. Ellen had two children left behind two children and my father a widow. When we called Janice from overseas in Thailand, It was difficult to even explain what had happened, and arrangements were made for Janice to travel to Thailand and console the family. Janice had said, "Well, now that he's gone, you can take me." She had prayed that she would not pass before Eddie, so when he passed, she was ready. However, when Ellen had passed, Janice had taken back her prayer to stay to help the family recover. At Ellen's memorial service, she had wanted the family dressed in bright colors as a celebration of life rather than a depressing funeral of mourning. Following Ellen's passing, my family had moved back to the United States to mourn with family and readjust to the change. After my mother's death, my family had all approached sadness in different forms. My father had sought loneliness in another woman's company. My sister had become an impulsive eater, and I became extremely antisocial. I was still attending the British International School in Thailand, and I went to school like any other day to keep myself with the horrible fact that my life was never going to be the same. In high school, I was extremely antagonistic around anyone focusing only on schoolwork, believing that people were just a distraction, objectifying my emotions. I had never truly been able to make amendments with my reckless past of my mother. It always haunts me to know that I took so many people for granted, and it extremely irritates me when my sister especially brings up my past as a way for convenient humor. She is well aware that I despise myself and I hate it when she does that, but nevertheless she does it anyway. Ever since my mother passed, my grandmother had served as my second mother, and I sometimes see my mother in her, which should not be a surprise due to the family bond. It simply reminds me of the personal failure to be considerate of what had been granted me. I see not only her physical appearance, but her loving personality that cares deeply for her family. Although I do not remember almost anything about my mother, and am possibly seeing connections that, that I believe are real, but could be what I want to see. Family is not determined by heritage, but by the hardships defined through goodwill as well as hardships of life.